Russia is sticking with the strategy it's come up with for 2025 in the wake of its ground offensives becoming less and less effective. Airstrikes using more missiles and drones than ever before have been raining down on Ukraine, but toward the end of September, Russia took it all a step too far. Rather than absorb the strikes and carry on defending its own territory, Ukraine decided to hit back. Ukraine's revenge was savage and ruthless, leaving one of Russia's border cities suffering from massive blackouts. That city is Belgorod. And on September 29th, Euromaidan Press reported that Ukraine had hit that city hard. We'll cover the details of what Ukraine took out soon, but here are the basics. Ukraine used long-range weapons, potentially not its own, to strike a pair of critical energy facilities in Belgorod. One of these facilities was the city's thermal power station, with the other being its electrical substation. Both are vital for keeping Belgorod's citizens supplied with power. You can guess what the results of Ukraine's revenge strike were from there. Blackouts have affected various parts of the city, according to Euromaidan Press reports. The strike has also been confirmed by the Belgorod regional governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, the Kyiv Post reports. According to the outlet, Gladkov released a statement claiming that enemy missiles had struck a Belgorod power station. While Gladkov mentioned the widespread blackouts, he was much keener to emphasize that Ukraine's attack had forced hospitals and police stations to operate using backup generators. Power outages had also limited the delivery of water to some of Belgorod's citizens, which again shows Gladkov trying to highlight the impact of Ukraine's strike on civilians. This statement tells us a lot about how Russia reacts to Ukraine's strikes. We've heard all the drone debris excuses that Russia likes to deliver whenever one of Ukraine's long-range drones hits its mark. But beyond this excuse, Russia will usually deny the success of Ukraine's strikes. So why is it confirming the Belgorod attack? We just hinted at the answer. The attack has affected Russian civilians. None have been injured or killed, at least not based on reports available at the time of creating this video. But because Russian citizens were deprived of power and in some cases water, Russia is publicizing this strike to make Ukraine seem like terrorists. This isn't conjecture, it's propaganda. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation maintains an online list of what it calls the terrorist crimes committed by the Kyiv regime. The document contains a long explanation of what Russia deems a terrorist act, though it basically boils down to Ukraine striking back after Russia has pounded Ukrainian cities with drones, bombs, and missiles. Ukraine isn't supposed to hit back, but when it does, and when those strikes in any way affect civilians, Russia sees an opportunity to paint Ukraine as the bad guys in a conflict that Russia started. And it does this, as is the case with the Belgorod strike, even when no civilians are killed by Ukraine's attacks. It's a transparent attempt to influence the narrative of the war. Almost everybody outside of Russia sees through it. So if Ukraine didn't strike civilians, as Russia has done so often throughout the Ukraine war, what did it hit in Belgorod? The Kyiv Post says that geolocated footage of Ukraine's strike shows that it scores at least 5 direct hits on a facility named TETS-4. Responsible for generating electricity, this facility burst into flames as a result of Ukraine's attack. Debris and explosions also damaged several key components of the facility, including fuel reservoirs and a fuel supply system, turbines, and the electrical substation we mentioned earlier in the video. More details come from Euromaidan Press, which says the facility Ukraine struck was rebuilt in 2007, allowing the installation of a modern gas turbine that gives TETS-4 a power output of gigacalories per hour. That's enough for the plant to provide for all of the thermal energy needs of Belgorod's central and northern districts, which Euromaidan Press says accounts for 36.3% of the city's total needs. This wasn't any old plant that Ukraine just took out. It was a plant that served over a third of a Russian city that is right on Ukraine's border. There's also footage of the strikes as they took place, shared by the Canal 13 YouTube channel. In a series of videos, the outlet shows various angles of the damaged power plant, many of which showcase massive black plumes of smoke streaming into the sky. On a few occasions, we see where the smoke is coming from, huge fires inside TETS-4 that Russia has confirmed were caused by a Ukrainian attack. And yet more confirmation of Ukraine's success comes from the Astra Telegram channel, which shares images of power outage reports making the rounds in Belgorod. Those images are accompanied by a statement confirming the previously mentioned water supply and power outage issues. Even if Russia wanted to deny what happened on the evening of September 27th and into 28th, the strike was too massive. The effects were felt by hundreds, if not thousands, of Belgorod citizens who suddenly found themselves without power and, in some cases, water. This wasn't something that Russia could hide, and to make matters worse, this strike seems like it was too big to have been conducted by Ukraine's drones. Another weapon was used, a weapon that Ukraine hasn't been able to use for a long time. But we'll come back to that later in the video. For now, it's important to point out that Ukraine didn't just randomly decide to hit Belgorod. This strike was payback for something Russia had just done hours before, and it was intended as a message delivered straight to Vladimir Putin. If you hit Ukraine's cities, Ukraine will hit Russian cities even harder. Just hours before Ukraine sent its weapons flying into Belgorod, Russia was again launching one of the many massive missile and drone strikes it's used throughout 2025 against Ukraine. The Kyiv Independent reported the main details on September 28th, noting that a massive drone attack lasting for almost 12 hours had hit multiple regions of Ukraine. Using nearly 500 drones and over 40 missiles, Russia had targeted cities up to and including the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, killing at least 4 people and injuring a further 70 in the process. One of the dead was a 12-year-old girl. The outlet adds that Russia's missiles and drones damaged or destroyed 20 individual locations, including a 5-story building in Kyiv. In total, 7 of Kyiv's districts had endured damage. We have details about how Russia managed to carry out the attack too. The Kyiv Independent says that Russia used 5 Tu-95 bombers in the strike, all of which took off from Olenia airfield in Murmansk at about 1:45 a.m. local time. About 45 minutes later, Russia also launched MiG-31K bombers, leading to aerial alerts being posted across Ukraine. More Tu-95s were launched from the Engels airbase, meaning Russia was clearly trying to hit Ukraine from as many angles as possible. It succeeded. Euromaidan Press provides more details, noting that Russia also targeted the Zaporizhia, Sumy, and Khmelnytsky oblasts with its overnight strike. In all cases, some of Russia's missiles and drones broke through Ukraine's air defenses, predominantly hitting residential buildings and vehicles in the process. Russia used Caliber, Kh-101 and Kh-55 cruise missiles in the attack, Euromaidan Press says. It also launched hundreds of its Gebera, Shahid-type Geran and decoy drones. What we see here is the clear contrast between Ukraine's airstrikes and those being conducted by Russia. Though Ukraine took out a Belgorod power station, that is a legitimate military target. Belgorod is on Ukraine's border, which also makes it a potential target for a Ukrainian incursion, much like the one we saw in Kursk in August 2024. Most importantly, no civilians were harmed in the Belgorod strike. If there were any hurt civilians, Russia would let the world know about it so it could feed its Ukraine are terrorists narrative even more. But really, it's Russia that's acting like a terrorist nation. Its September 28th airstrike has killed Ukrainian civilians, like so many of Russia's airstrikes and ground assaults before it. According to Statista, statistics provided by the UN Human Rights Office say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused 13,883 civilian deaths, along with 35,548 injuries as of July 31st, 2025. 726 children have been killed in these attacks, and now more after Russia's September 28th strike, with a further 2,234 of the injured also being children. Russia strikes indiscriminately. Its missiles and drones aren't aimed at military targets. They're sent into Ukraine to wreak havoc, cause terror, and kill civilians. That's the difference in the airstrikes we see from both sides. Ukraine is precise. Dangerous, though always in the context of hitting legitimate targets that damage Putin's war machine. It's not the terrorists that Russia tries to claim Ukraine to be. Frankly, Russia is hypocritical whenever it tries to tar Ukraine with a terrorist brush, considering the substantial impact on civilians that Russia's attacks have had. After all, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had delivered a stark warning to Russia just a day before Putin ordered hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles to strike Ukrainian territory. If they threaten blackouts, for example, in the capital of Ukraine, then they should know in the Kremlin that there will be a blackout in the capital of Russia, Zelensky had roared during a Kyiv briefing on September 27th. Granted, Ukraine only partially delivered on its promise. It caused mass blackouts in Belgorod rather than Moscow. But even that could feed back into the message Ukraine sent with this attack, that it could strike Russia just as hard as Russia hits Ukraine. Today it was Belgorod, Ukraine seems to be implying. If Russia keeps on attacking Kyiv, it may be Moscow's turn to experience the wrath of Ukrainian missiles. However, perhaps calling them Ukraine's missiles is a misnomer. And that brings us back to something we mentioned earlier in the video. To conduct its Belgorod strike, Ukraine decided not to use the long-range drones it had used in so many of its oil refinery strikes during August and September. Those drones have enough firepower to disrupt refineries enough to cause shutdowns, but they don't hit hard enough to take out an entire power station. Ukraine needed missiles for Belgorod. And it wasn't missiles that Ukraine manufactured itself that it used for the strike. It was US-made missiles. The Kyiv Post says that the footage and imagery captured of the explosions at Tets 4 suggests that Ukraine used the US-made M31 GMLRS, or ground-launched small-diameter bomb, to do the damage in Belgorod. Though technically classified as an artillery rocket, the M31 is a precision-guided weapon that acts in much the same way as a long-range missile. It also packs a 200-pound high-explosive warhead and is capable of traveling up to 100 miles to strike its target. Ukraine certainly has the launch platforms needed to send the M31s Russia's way. The M31 can be fired from both the HIMARS launcher, of which Ukraine had about 40 as of May 2025, and the M270 multiple launch rocket system, which Ukraine is also believed to have. The specific version of the M31 used, presuming it was the precision-guided bomb that hit Belgorod so many times, is also a new version, the Kyiv Post reports. The M31s Ukraine received in the past were short-range munitions that, though useful and powerful, wouldn't have been able to strike so deep into Russian territory. Now, Ukraine has M31s that can hit Belgorod and, based on their range, could also do some serious damage in Kursk. This alone shouldn't be massive news. We know that Ukraine has plenty of US-made weapons capable of striking Russian territory. And we also know that Ukraine received permission to use those weapons in a limited capacity against Russian targets from former President Joe Biden back in November 2024. However, a lot has changed since November, as Biden has left office and Donald Trump is now president. Under Trump, a small, though very relevant change had occurred that made it much more difficult for Ukraine to carry out these types of strikes we just saw in Belgorod. The Wall Street Journal, or WSJ, explained what was happening in August. In an exclusive article, the WSJ explained that several unnamed officials had confirmed to it that the US had a new policy in place that blocked Ukraine from using American-made weapons in Russian territory. The policy had been in place for 4 months before the article's publication, and it took the form of an approval process. To fire any American missile or bomb at Russia, Ukraine had to go through a review mechanism that gives the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth final say on whether Ukraine can use US-made munitions inside Russia or not. For months, the Pentagon, under Hegseth's leadership, had been saying no to Ukraine. That's why we hadn't been hearing any stories about Ukraine using ATACMS missiles or the M31 GMLRS used in Belgorod against Russia. The US wouldn't allow it, and Ukraine was essentially banned from hitting Russia with anything other than weapons that it made domestically. With all of this context, Ukraine's Belgorod strike goes from being an extremely effective attack to one that has long-term ramifications for the entire war. This wasn't any old strike. It was an aerial attack conducted using American-made weapons, which can mean only one thing. The US is once again giving Ukraine the okay to use its weapons to hit Russia. There were hints that this was coming just a couple of days before Ukraine pulled off its latest attack. On September 26th, The Independent reported that Trump had created what could end up being a potentially huge policy change. As The Independent put it, President Donald Trump reportedly told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that he was open to lifting certain restrictions on the use of certain US-made weapons, signaling a potentially huge change in policy. Apparently, this turnaround came when Zelensky and Trump met at the United Nations General Assembly a few days prior. Trump delivered a speech at that assembly in which he criticized Putin for his bad leadership. Now the US is allowing Ukraine to turn that criticism into action against Russia's leader. The Independent also reports that Zelensky asked Trump to lift the ban on using ATACMS missiles against Russia. Plus, Ukraine's leader inquired about the possibility of the US providing Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, some of which have ranges of up to 1,500 miles. The US is considering this latter request, The Independent says. As for the former, we don't know if Ukraine can use ATACMS in Russia. But thanks to Belgorod, we know that it can now use the M31. Permission has been granted, and Ukraine delivering payback against Russia for one of Putin's biggest airstrikes of the war so far seems to be the perfect way to deliver the message to Russia that the US is back on board. Russia isn't happy about any of this. After news broke that the US is considering supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, Russia's propagandists went into overdrive. Among them was Dmitry Peskov, who so often says things that Putin wants to say. The Kremlin mouthpiece responded to US Vice President J.D. Vance's suggestion that Tomahawks could head to Ukraine with a string of questions. The question is this: who can launch these missiles? Peskov asked. Can only Ukrainians launch them, or do American soldiers have to do that? Who is determining the targets of these missiles, the American side or the Ukrainians themselves? Andrei Kotopolov, who leads the Kremlin's Defense Committee, was much blunter in his assessment. He claimed that any hint of US military specialists helping Ukraine to launch Tomahawks at Russia would make the US a target. And no one will protect them, not Trump, not Kellogg, nor anyone else, Kotopolov threatened. Peskov added that a very in-depth analysis of American involvement needs to take place, and that the use of Tomahawks would represent an escalation of the Ukraine conflict. Reading between the lines, we can draw an obvious conclusion from these responses. Russia is scared, and it should be. We mentioned that Tomahawks have a maximum range of 1,500 miles earlier in the video. That's more than far enough for Ukraine to use them in deep strikes into the heart of Moscow, which would also allow Zelensky to fully deliver on his promise he made on September 27th. And now, assuming it was indeed M31s used against Belgorod, Russia has just seen the US is again happy for Ukraine to start using American-made weapons on Russian territory. Simply put, there's only one reason why the US would provide Tomahawks to Ukraine. It's all about long-range strikes. Ukraine knows it, the US knows it, and Russia knows precisely how much damage these terrifying missiles could do against targets deep inside Russia that Ukraine's previous drone strikes have already proven are poorly guarded against attacks from the air. Losing power in Belgorod already hurts Russia. But what Ukraine just achieved with this strike shows us that the US is on the verge of conducting a U-turn that Putin never saw coming. What we see here is the final manifestation of Trump's growing frustration with Putin. Ever since he took office, Trump has been pushing for peace, or at least a ceasefire in Ukraine. He's almost come close a few times too. Through it all, Putin has been stringing Trump along with claims that he wants peace, which are then swiftly followed by yet more devastating airstrikes and grinding ground assaults against Ukraine. The thread of Trump's patience was already wearing thin. On September 12th, Reuters reported that fact, noting that Trump had said as much when asked about his patience with Putin. "Yeah, it's sort of running out and running out fast," Reuters reports Trump as saying during an interview with Fox News. During that interview, Trump hinted at more sanctions being used to hit Russia where it hurts economically. But fast forward a couple of weeks, and we now have rumors of the US sending Tomahawks to Ukraine, and what appears to be the lifting of restrictions on Ukraine's use of American-made weapons inside Russia. The thin thread has snapped. And Belgorod now burns because Putin couldn't help but order yet another drone and missile strike against Ukraine. Attacks on Russia are just the start of Putin's problems as the fall delivers more and more bad news for Russia's president. Domestically, Putin is watching the empire he built around himself crumble. It's almost over for Putin. Russia is spiraling into chaos after the Ukraine war backfired. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes against Russia's war machine. And thank you as always for watching.